Everyone. My name is Diana Lindsay, and welcome to another Sunbelt Spotlight. I'm delighted today because our author happens to be a personal friend, and she's actually the author of 3 Sunbelt books. Today, she will be talking about the other side, and very excited about this. And I'd just like to kind of take a second here and tell you a little bit about this book that she's going to be talking about, because it's not only a memoir, and it's a journey both inside and outside. And what the back of the book says, it says the outer journey explores the length, breadth, and depth of Baja California with its rich history, its vibrant people, and the haunting beauty of its land. The inner journey moves through a tumultuous border world where cultures meet and clash and sometimes merge, and where an encounter with another way of life can illuminate the undiscovered landscape of the soul. It's a book that's really appropriate for our times right now with all that is happening along the border. And so this is one of the reasons that I'm excited to have Judy speak today. I do want to, here's the commercial. You got to have the commercial before we jump into it. And the commercial is that this book is available through our Sunbelt website at a discount because of our featured speaker. So if you are interested in this book, please go to our website, which is sunbeltpublications.com, and take advantage of the discount for our special speaker today. A few things just so that you will know how we conduct the spotlight. You'll see the chat box there. If you have questions that you would like to ask Judy after her presentation, we will be able to open it up for questions, and she will be able to respond to those. A little bit of background on Judy and a couple of quick things here. Our Sunbelt Spotlights are events that we do at least once each month. Next month, we will have Phil Pride speaking about the San Diego Desert region. We hope you can join. And to find out about other speakers we have, please go to our Facebook page, Sunbelt Publications Facebook. Just type that into your search engine, and that'll take you right there, and you can click on and reserve at any of our other talks that we do have. I just want to make sure again that you do know to check in on the chat button to ask questions. So a little bit of background on Judy before she speaks, so that you know a little bit more about her. Judy is a retired pediatrician. I mentioned she was the author of 3 books published by Sunbelt. She's an extremely good writer, has written for many anthologies. She used to be a book reviewer when the San Diego Union had book reviews, so she had done that. She's also one of the things I need to say is that this book is a true story. So the names have been changed, but everybody in the story, including her husband, who is Victor Botello, this is an actual true story that she's going to be relating to you and telling you about the story. So Judy currently is retired, but over the last dozen years, she's become very involved with local organizations down in Baja California. And as a retired pediatrician, she has been working as a doctor and as a Baja explorer. And so when she's not in Baja helping people through her medical profession, she lives in Escondido and is enjoying her retirement. So Judy, without further ado, please take it away and tell us more about your adventures in Baja.
Thank you. Thanks, Diana, and thanks to Rebecca for organizing this. I'm really happy to be here. So it's been more than 40 years since I first fell in love with Baja California in particular and Mexico in general. And it's been more than 20 years since I wrote this book, my travel memoir about Baja. Clearly, over all that time, there have been some very profound changes in Baja, in Mexico in general, and God knows in me. some of those changes I anticipated. I could see them coming, especially in Baja. You know, one of the motivations for me for writing this book was to try to preserve in words a Baja that I loved, that so many of us loved, but that we saw disappearing. You know, there has been great encroachment by development, by timeshares, by tourism, and I could see that coming. We could all see that coming. Some of the changes that I did not anticipate were all the drugs and the cartels and the devastation that that has wrought on Mexico and Baja. But, you know, significant as all these changes have been, in some ways they are surface changes. If you scratch the surface, the people and the culture of Mexico and of Baja are the same. It takes more than a couple of decades to change a people and to change a culture. And when you get right down to it, it was really always about the people. It was always about the people and the culture. That's what pulled me in, and that's what continues to pull me in to this day. And they haven't changed. Mexicans, many Mexicans, when they're heading to the US, they will say, me voy pa'l otro lado. I'm going over to the other side, as if they're going to some alternate reality, some completely other world. And in some ways, I think that is appropriate. Mexico and the US, we are each other's other side. What they have, we need. What we have, they need. It's like yin and yang. And if you ever doubt this, just go down to the San Ysidro border sometime and look at the endless stream of cars going north and the endless stream of cars going south. Everybody looking for something on the other side. Everybody seeking something that they feel they can find on the other side. One of my writing heroes is Harriet Doerr. Harriet Doerr is another woman who fell in love with Mexico, an American woman who fell in love with Mexico, and she wrote about it extremely eloquently in her book called Stones for Ibarra, which I heartily recommend to anybody who's interested in Mexico. In an interview, Harriet Doerr was once asked, what is it that attracts you to Mexico? And she said, in Mexico, I find a part of myself that I didn't even know I had lost. And that's how I feel. In Mexico, I find my own other side. One of the lost parts of ourselves that I think we find in Mexico is sensuality, our sensuality. When I cross the border, immediately all my senses come alive. I smell diesel fumes, I smell tropical fruits, I smell flowers, I smell that ubiquitous, wonderful fragrance of corn tortillas. I hear cars honking, kids screaming, people shouting, birds twittering, and of course music. I hear mariachi music, norteño music, all kinds of music. The sun feels warmer, the wind feels windier, all of my senses come alive. So in a country of sensuality, one of the most sensual experiences by far is the bullfight. Now, you may love bullfights or you may hate bullfights. I suspect that this audience, most people feel pretty negatively about bullfights, but however you feel, you're not neutral. Nobody's neutral about bullfights. So I would like to start by reading a little excerpt from my book, This is about my first experience at a bullfight. The background of this excerpt is, it occurs in the first chapter of the book, and I was just becoming friends with the man that I call Carlos in the book, who all of you who know me know Carlos is Victor, who's now my husband. We were just becoming friends, and Carlos and his friend Jorge had taken me down to Tijuana to see a bullfight in the old bull ring in Tijuana. So we enter the bull ring, and I'm dazzled by all the sights and the sounds and everything that was so different. And I've been driving Carlos crazy by asking him questions, bugging the hell out of him, which is something I still do to this day. And he has responded by pretty much, he's just stopped asking me answering my questions. So I'll pick up the excerpt from there. By this time, I had learned that it was almost impossible to get a direct answer to a direct question from either Carlos or Jorge. Conversation seemed to move the way traffic moved in Tijuana, in no direction at all or in all directions at once. Carlos said cryptically, "When the matador comes out, watch how he calls the bull." I could tell that there was no use asking any more questions. But when the first matador swept into the plaza, sparkling in his suit of lights and brandishing his cape, I couldn't restrain myself. "What do you mean, how he calls the bull?" All Carlos said was, "Look." As I watched, the matador faced the massive beast pawing the ground 15 feet away from him. He seemed to impale the animal with his eyes, fixing him with an intense gaze. The bull stopped pawing and stood motionless, returning the man's gaze. The two remained that way for almost a full minute, locked in a mutual absorption that shocked me with its intimacy. Then the matador gave his cape the slightest flick, never taking his eyes from the eyes of the bull. As if drawn by a secret cord, the bull began to move, running toward the man, head down, horns out. The matador's body was absolutely still, every muscle poised and perfect, like a stag scenting the wind. Only his hands moved, sweeping a sudden circle of cape across his body and leading the bull's head in an arc that passed only inches from him, immobile. The crowd roared, "Ole!" and I exhaled the breath I had not known I was holding. My heart was pounding and my palms were wet. Heat and blood and dust filled my nostrils, and I was still shaking when the inevitable moment arrived. The matador raised himself over his bull, long sword poised. I covered my eyes with my hands, peering out from between my fingers. I saw what I knew I would see, what I both feared and needed to see, man and animal, now locked together by a palpable energy merged into one, joined in the final climactic plunge of the blade into yielding flesh. The bull sank to its knees. The crowd rose up roaring. I buried my face in Carlos's shoulder and wept. So, sensuality, that's pretty damn sensual. So Mexico's intensely sensual, and it brings that out in us. Another aspect of Mexican culture that I think we gringos need and appreciate is their incredible open-hearted hospitality. When they say mi casa es su casa, they mean my home is your home. And all of us who have traveled in Baja, and I know in this group, there are quite a few Baja nuts like me. We've all had the experience of encountering a family who has very little, almost nothing compared to our standards, but who freely give of whatever they have without question in this amazing open-hearted way that I think that's a lost part of ourselves. So I want to read you another little section from my book about my encounter with this amazing Mexican hospitality. The background for this excerpt is it was a December, and I was traveling with my 2 young children and another couple and their young daughter. So 6 of us in a VW bus with a tent, and we were heading down to a little town called Mulegé, which is in the southern part of Baja. We were going to spend New Year's Eve down there. It was going to be a several days journey, and we were prepared to camp along the way. A few hours out of San Diego on the first day of the journey, it had been very rainy that December. Unlike this year, it had been a really rainy year. We arrived on the first afternoon in a town called El Rosario, and we found when we arrived there that the road, the only road, the one road, was washed out. That was it. No road. Dead end. So that's a pretty typical Baja moment, at least it was in those days. What do? Well, you wait until the road is fixed. You hang out 1 day, 2 days, a week, whatever it takes till the road is fixed, and you go on. Well, in order to hang out till the road was fixed, we had to find a place to camp. So we scanned this little town, and we saw a house kind of up on a hill with a flat yard in front of it. And we thought, well, maybe they'll allow us to camp on their yard. Maybe we can pay them a little bit. So we go up and knock on the door. And here's the excerpt about what happened. The Duartes lived in a bubblegum pink house set back from the dirt road by a dirt yard where magenta geraniums sprouted in tin wash tubs and an old camper shell rusted away among tires and engine parts. Behind the house, red chiles dried on every possible surface. They spread over the ground and over the roof of the hen house. They hung from the walls, and they even shared the clothesline with Senor Duarte's overalls. Only the twin outhouses at the far end of the property were spared. Senora Duarte opened the door immediately when we knocked, as if she had been expecting us. Her husband stood behind her, and 4 pairs of small round eyes peered out from behind him until a woman's voice called sharply from the dim interior. The elder Duartes were both tall and stooped and gray, and their bodies were bent in the same direction, as if they had been blown for many years by the same wind. They regarded us calmly, unsurprised to find 6 Norte Americanos on their doorstep seeking shelter. Pitch a tent in their yard? Certainly not. We were not gypsies, but their home was our home. Mi casa es su casa. There were 2 beds, they pointed out, 1 for each family. Where would we sleep? Where would they sleep? We asked. And that question was dismissed with a wave of the hand as too trivial to even answer. We were ushered in and shown 2 tiny bedrooms, each just large enough for the 1 double bed it contained. The beds were still rumpled from their previous night's occupants, and they looked comfortable, like home. Night and the temperature were both falling fast, and we accepted their offer gratefully, with no further discussion. I was too tired and bewildered at the time to reflect on the Duarte's unconditional hospitality. But months later, remembering that night, I wondered how I would have reacted to 6 bedraggled strangers on my doorstep at twilight, asking in broken English to camp on my front lawn. I don't think I would have been quite as hospitable as the Duartes were. So sensuality, the immediacy of experience, hospitality, that wonderful open-heartedness. What else do we find of our hidden selves in Mexico? For me, one of the big lessons has been the lesson of letting go. It's a lesson I'm still working on, folks. We gringos tend to think that we can control everything. We're taught from an early age that taking control is a virtue. And certainly taking control of one's life has a lot of advantages. It's a characteristic of our own culture that people from other countries admire and even come to this country to partake in. And I'm not knocking it, but it does have its downside. For one thing, it can be absolutely exhausting. And for another thing, the fact of the matter is there's a lot that we can't control. Mexicans know this. They're much better than we are at accepting those things that they cannot change. So finally, I don't want to I'm okay. So finally, I want to read you a little piece about my early lessons in letting go. This excerpt I'm going to read in 2 separate parts. So the first part, this takes place in about the middle of the book. And at this point, my friendship with Carlos is deepening and getting more serious, and I'm fighting it. I'm saying, this will never work. We're from different worlds. We come from different cultures. Nah, forget it. This isn't going to happen. And in this excerpt, I'm talking to my girlfriend, Marge, who is not buying it, but I'm trying to convince her that this is never going to work. So I say, think about this, Marge. Have you ever noticed that in Spanish, nobody's responsible for anything? It's a whole culture of fatalism built right into the language. You don't miss the train loses itself to you. Se me perdió el tren. If you drop a plate, it's actually the plate's fault. Se me cayó el plato. Can you imagine me living life as an indirect object? So my friend Marge, who never minced any words, says to me, for a smart broad, sometimes you can be incredibly dense. Do you really believe you can be the subject of every goddamn sentence? Only Americans think they have that much control. Life is full of reflexive verbs and indirect objects. Shit happens, karma happens, love happens. She pushed a strand of sun-streaked hair off her forehead and looked at me. Life happens. Just let it in for once, Judy. Well, I think I walked away from that conversation muttering under my breath, oh, she doesn't understand. So later in this chapter, I take a trip down to Bahia de Los Angeles, LA Bay, which is about halfway down the peninsula. It's on the Sea of Cortez, otherwise known as the Gulf of California. And I went down with a couple other families and we were camping on the beach. Now, LA Bay is beautiful. It's a wonderful, wild spot. It was more wild then than it is now. It is known for a lot of things, including great fishing, but it's also known for its wind. The wind can come up suddenly in LA Bay, anywhere in Baja, but especially in LA Bay. And there have actually been some tragic cases of kayakers caught suddenly by that devil wind and on some occasions drowned. So there we are, we're camping on the beach in LA Bay, and two of the guys have gone out to fish in a little yellow inflatable, I forget what you call them, little inflatable boat that's yellow. And I think those things are about 2 horsepower, maybe 4. They're not very powerful. And these guys are out in the middle of the bay fishing. And of course, suddenly the wind comes up, a big wind. And those of us on the shore are kind of worried. Is she going to be able to, are they going to be able to make it back against the wind? So we're standing there looking at this little inflatable and hoping they make it back, and nothing we can do. So here's the section from the book. We stood there for what seemed like hours. Nothing happened. The patch of yellow didn't grow any larger, but it didn't disappear beneath the waves either. The wind didn't abate. Kay never lowered her hand from her eyes. She was looking out. And Tara never lowered her arm from Lisa's shoulders. After a time, we all grew bored with the crisis, since there was absolutely nothing any of us could do. There was no Coast Guard to call, and there were no telephones to call with. There were no lifeguards. There was not even a radio station to give a weather forecast or a radio that could receive such a station. We were clearly the indirect objects of the wind's sentence. Whatever would happen would be utterly beyond our control. And my growing sense of fatalism brought a feeling of calm. Time passes, we go back into our tents and our campers and play cards and read, and nothing happens. And then I go back after a while, back onto the beach. My curious sense of calm deepened. I seemed to have let go of some dark inner weight. In the place where that burden had been, I now discovered a kind of lightness and peace that was entirely new to me. Across that bright inner space floated a phrase like an aerial banner against a summer sky. It was a phrase that formed itself in Spanish, unbidden by my conscious mind. Se te fue el miedo, the banner said, naming me as the indirect object. The fear has gone from you. So that was my initiation into the art of letting go. I'm still working on it, but Baja can really teach you that, because you never know from one minute to the next what's going to happen. You have very little control once you cross that border. So sensuality, immediacy of experience, hospitality, open-heartedness, and this wonderful, beautiful acceptance, ability to accept. These are things I've learned from the people of Mexico, and I owe them a lot. Before I stop and open this up to your comments and questions, I do want to say a little bit about the land of Baja itself. I mean, my book is a lot about people, but it's also about the land. And those of us who love Baja California love the people and the culture, but we also love the land, the wild, timeless, beautiful land of Baja. Baja California, the peninsula, it's 1,000 miles long. And politically, it's part of Mexico. It's 2 states, Baja California and Baja California Sur. They are states belonging to Mexico. So politically and somewhat culturally, it is Mexico. But it's also different. It's also a place unto itself. I compare it maybe a little bit to Alaska in relation to the US. So Alaska is the US, but it's also very different from the lower 48. It's a place unto itself. And people who live Mexicans who live on the mainland know as little about Baja California as maybe some of us know about Alaska. In fact, when I was trying to get my book published, I sent it out to a bunch of publishers, including some New York publishers, and one very snooty New York publisher wrote me back a really nasty rejection letter. I got some nice rejection letters. This was a nasty one. And she said, I lived in Mexico City for 2 years, and this is nothing like Mexico. Well, of course it's not. It's about Baja, which is about as different from Mexico City as Denali National Park is from New York City. So Baja California is a place unto itself. One of my favorite books about Baja was written by a Mexican journalist back in the 1950s. He worked for a newspaper in Mexico City, and La Paz, which is the capital of Baja California Sur, was just opening up, and his editor sent him to La Paz, Baja California, to cover the story of this new state and this new capital. And he fell in love, like so many of us have, and he never left Baja. He settled in La Paz and he stayed there for the rest of his life. And he wrote a book about Baja California, and the title of the book is El Otro Lado, the other side. I'm sorry, that's my book. El Otro Mexico, the other Mexico. And Baja California is the other Mexico. That wildness, it was disappearing. I thought it was disappearing, which is one of the things that motivated me to write the book. It's good for Baja in many ways to have more tourism, timeshares, restaurants, but it does cut into what we old timers have loved about Baja. I'm happy to say there are still wild places. There are still little settlements that haven't changed in 200 years, little ranches that are the same as they've ever been, where you can only get around by foot or by mule. There are still a few pristine beaches left where you find no footprint, and it's just you and the gulls and the sea lions. Fewer of them than there used to be, but there are still some. Before I open it up to your comments and questions, I want to read one more excerpt, and this one is not from my own book. It's from a master, John Steinbeck, who wrote in the 1940s a book called Log from the Sea of Cortez. And he describes the wildness of Baja, I think, better than just about anybody I know. He and his compatriots, his colleagues, had been in La Paz, and of course La Paz in those days was just barely opening up, and it is on the Sea of Cortez, otherwise known as the Gulf. And John Steinbeck writes this about Baja California: some quality there is in the whole Gulf that trips a trigger of recognition, so that in fantastic and exotic scenery, one finds oneself nodding and saying inwardly, yes, I know. And on the shore, the wild doves mourn in the evening. And then there comes a pang, some kind of emotional jar and a longing. And if one followed his whispering impulse, he would walk away slowly into the thorny brush, following the call of the doves. I would say that John Steinbeck found his other side. So I am open to questions, comments. Rebecca, are you there?
Judy, first of all, thank you so very much. And you can all see, and you've heard what a gifted writer Judy is. She's pretty amazing. And we have questions that have come in. So I am going to go ahead and read a couple of these to you. One of the first, what happened to the fishermen in the yellow boat?
Oh, they made it back. It took hours. The wind eventually died down, as winds do eventually. And luckily they didn't, we were worried that they were going to be blown off to Isla Tiburon, which is way the hell out there. But they held their own, the wind died down, and they made it back. They
And
caught fish, yes. Victor reminded me, they did. They caught some fish, we ate them, and the episode ended happily.
excellent. Judy, somebody else wanted to know, when were you first inspired to become an author?
You know, I have always loved writing. Since I was a little girl, I've always loved to write. I love literature. My sister Janet Wickler is in the audience and she's waving her hand. She, when I was in college, I used to write poetry on the backs of envelopes, and I kept my poetry in a shoebox. And my sister urged me, I don't know, was probably early, maybe 1990 or something. She said, well, send them out, what can you lose? And I said, no, nobody. Anyway, she encouraged me and I sent some poems out, and lo and behold, a literary journal did publish one of my poems. And that inspired me, like, oh, maybe somebody does want to read what I write. And then she again inspired me. I owe my sister a lot because she believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And, I think I was saying, I'd really like to write about Baja. I feel like I have so much I want to say about it. And she said, well, do it. What are you waiting for? If not now, when? My kids had grown up, they were bigger. They were like in high school, and I didn't have that excuse. And she just said, do it. So I did.
Wow, that's pretty good. All right, another question. What continues to draw you to Baja California?
The same things that have always drawn me to Baja California. The beauty of the land, the sides of myself that come out as soon as I cross the border. I'm not quite going to say I become a different person, but different pieces of me come out. I feel freer. I love the people. The same things that drew me 40 years ago still draw me. The beauty, the magic, the music, the people, the wild country. What's not to love?
You wrote this book over 20 years ago. Why would this be important in these times to to read this book, and how can it help you understand the other side and the situation we're in today?
It would be it would be asking a lot to ask this book to change people's minds. I think obviously I don't have to say that the whole immigration question, the question of people from other cultures coming to our country, is a huge issue. I think that when you know individual people from other countries and other cultures, it's impossible to feel any enmity towards them. It's one thing to think about immigration in general, but when you think about individual people that you get to know, and you know their stories, and you know them as human beings, not abstractions. Words like immigrant, refugee, those are abstractions, but those abstractions refer to real people and people that we can interact with, that we can learn from them, they can learn from us. we can love them, they can love us, we can like them, they can be our friends. So I think it's all about knowing people, not as abstractions, not as representatives of something. I don't pretend that this book is going to make much of a difference, but anybody who travels and interacts with the people of another culture, you know, comes away knowing more about themselves and more about that other culture. And I think the more you know about a person or a culture, the harder it is to hate it.
Here's an interesting question from Jacob. What is your experience of reading the book 20 plus years after writing it? Not with respect to Baja, but with respect to the book itself as a reader of your own work.
That's a very good question. I think I know that Jacob who asked the question. That's an excellent question. Well, you know, I have to say, Jake, that rereading it makes me want to rewrite it. I see all the places that I'd like to edit, tweak, redo. I could see this as a first draft. You know, self-criticism. It's fun to reread it. I will say there are parts of it that I still like, that I think, yeah, that was a pretty good phrase, or I described that pretty well. But there are a lot of places where I'd like to take a red pencil to it and redo. But you know, it's fun. It's fun to. I haven't read it, I don't think, in 20 years, so it's kind of fun to revisit some of those experiences.
Here's a question from somebody who spends 6 to 8 months a year down in Baja. And they want to know, how would you recommend getting to know the local community versus just the gringo community?
Well, the first thing would be to speak Spanish. I mean, if you don't have the language, it's very hard to get to know people on any deep level. But even if you, my experience was that, you know, I learned Spanish little by little by little. And even when I had just a little bit of Spanish, and it was bad Spanish, and I was making a lot of mistakes, people were so warm and accepting. So I think even trying a little bit of Spanish, I think the Mexican people, the people of Baja, they are so welcoming, open. And if you try to get to know them, if you go halfway, they'll go 3/4 of the way. If you speak, you know, 3 or 4 words in broken Spanish, they'll love it. They'll encourage you. So how to get to know the locals? Talk to them. You know, go to the places that they frequent. I don't know who this person who asked the question is. I'm a pretty shy person. I had to overcome timidity to start speaking in Spanish when I knew that my Spanish was terrible. You have to make that leap. You have to be prepared to sound silly and make mistakes and just embrace it. Okay, I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. I'm just going to try. And every Mexican I've ever met has been very welcoming. They're not like the French. The French, if you don't speak perfect French, don't even try. The Mexicans are extremely welcoming to any attempts.
You know, it's been many years since you've been a practicing pediatrician, and now you've turned your attention to being a volunteer down there to provide medical dental services to remote communities in the mountains of Baja. Are you working with any particular organization, or how are you doing this, and how did you get involved in this kind of work?
I see the Everts are right here. Wave your hands, Bill and Sue. Bill and Sue Everts are friends of mine, and they started a small not-for-profit organization called Amigos de los Californios. The Californios are well, there were a few Indian tribes in Baja California before the Europeans showed up. the Europeans showed up and in the form of missionaries. The missionaries made their way from Loreto all the way up through what's now Alta California, up to San Francisco, leaving missions behind and leaving soldiers behind and craftsmen, the Europeans who came with them. Those folks intermarried with the indigenous people of Baja, and that race of people is known as the Californios. So those Californios still live in remote ranches, especially in the mountains of Baja that go down the center spine of the peninsula. They still live in many places the way they've always lived. They're so remote that there's not much in the way of roads. I'm speaking of the way things were 20 years ago. Things are changing, but there's still some pretty remote ranches. So Bill and Sue started an organization to provide, initially it was just dental services, and then it became dental and medical services to some of these very remote communities. And Victor and I became involved, about probably 12, 15 years ago, and have gone down with Bill and Sue. I think I saw Rod is here. He also goes down. I saw Joe Zoloff's name somewhere. I think he's here somewhere. So a bunch of us go down, used to go down. And I have to say, it's a wonderful experience. I, for one, have gotten much more than I've given in those excursions. They are beautiful people. You know, I have to tell you one thing. So long ago, when I would talk to people about these remote places that I would go, somebody said to me once, so do you take any protection? And I didn't even know what they were talking about. I'm like, protection? I'm married, I'm monogamous. What kind of? And then I realized that they're talking about being scared of these remote places, which once you go there, it's such a ridiculous concept. The more remote you get, the farther away from the border you get, the safer it is. So these remote villages where I've gone with this organization, the people are so beautiful and loving and kind and good. I mean, it's an incredible experience to be there. Not to mention that they're wild and beautiful places. It's like going back in time. It's like going back 200 years. So I love doing it. I don't know if I give much to the people. I certainly get a lot from doing it.
You know, this organization that you're talking about, is this just a small group of people, or is this something that people can contribute to help buy medical supplies?
Yes, and yes. It's a small organization, and yes, people can help by contributing. It's a 501c3 not-for-profit. It's called Amigos de los Californios. They have a website. I think it's amigosdeloscalifornios.org. Is that right, Bill? Yeah. And they can also, you know, if they want to go through you, Diana, you can email me and I can tell people how to contribute.
Excellent. Judy, this has just been outstanding. A couple of quick comments. So many comments about your writing ability, and somebody wants to know if you will rewrite the other side and update it. They said they would buy the book if you are willing to work on it. Another one, I love how you use grammar as metaphor. It's a theme. And another one, that people just appreciate how the work that you're doing down there. Somebody wants to know what towns in Baja are just now being discovered.
What you mean by tourists?
That's maybe some towns that perhaps have not been visited very often. So they're I guess they're wanting to know
where they could go to find something kind of untouched.
Yeah, remote, maybe where are some remote places you could still go to?
You know, a few years ago, I went back to Mulaje. Mulaje is in southern Baja. It's still pretty, it's a beautiful place. It's an oasis. Um, it was quite damaged by a hurricane some years back, and I think that I think it's not as touristy as some other places. One of my favorite places is Loreto, but I can hardly say that that's undiscovered. It's very discovered. Um, you know, these little villages that we go to in the mountains are very undiscovered, but they're not, it's like there's not hotels or anything. You have to be prepared to camp. There are a whole series of prehistoric cave paintings in the mountains of Baja California that are incredible. And you can get there by mule through these mountain communities. So if somebody's looking for a really off the beaten track, amazing, once in a lifetime experience, after the pandemic is over, going down to the cave paintings is something not to be missed. There's the last chapter of my book is about the cave paintings. That would be a great excursion. There are also excursions to the friendly whales, which I would hardly say it's undiscovered, but it takes you to places that are pretty undeveloped, and you get to pet a whale sometimes. And to see friendly whales, baby whales that come right up to your boat. I mean, that's an amazing experience if somebody's looking for something different to do. I will give I don't know if Carol Kramer's here, but I will give a plug to her organization called Discover Baja, which is, it's a travel agency really that specializes in Baja California. And they can arrange all kinds of excursions to all kinds of places, discovered and undiscovered. So it's called Discover Baja, and it also has a website, discoverbaja.com. And for anybody who wants to travel in Baja, that's a great resource.
Excellent insurance too for your vehicle going down.
They sell very good insurance for people who want to travel down there.
Well, once again, I want to remind people that this book is discounted. And if you heard a little bit of the writings, the wonderful writings, and how gifted Judy is in putting things into words, and if you'd like to read the whole thing, please visit our website. It is being discounted right now. I want to thank you, Judy. This has been an absolutely lovely experience. And just judging from all the comments, I think this has been a wonderful experience for many of those that are here. For those that that might be interested but missed this talk, please let them know that we do record our talks, and that in a couple of days we will have links on our website and on the Facebook page so that you can direct your friends to listen to this talk. And the discounted book will be available for several days, several weeks, so they could still take advantage of this sale that we're having on Judy's book. Again, Judy, I want to thank you so much for being our guest on Sunbelt Spotlight. And I do want to invite all of you to, come and join us on another spotlight. We try to feature our authors. Next time, we do have Phil Pride, who will be talking about the entire San Diego region. And again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you at the next spotlight.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.